The Guardian's Light. Once upon a time, in a small village tucked between rolling green hills and narrow dirt paths, lived a young girl named Ilara. Her life was once filled with the warm scent of wood smoke and her mother's humming, but a cruel sickness swept through the valley, claiming both of her parents in a single devastating winter. At just 10 years old, Ilara found herself standing alone in the silence of an empty cottage. The world she knew suddenly turned to ash. With no one else to turn to, she was taken in by her uncle's family. While the village expected this to be a sanctuary, it quickly became a place of hardship. Her aunt and uncle viewed her not as a niece to be loved, but as a burden to be managed. In their household, Ilara was the first to wake and the last to sleep. She was given a thin mat in the drafty corner of the kitchen and was often deprived of eating enough food for the day, left to survive on the scraps and crusts discarded by her cousins. Despite the gnawing hunger and the cold indifference of her relatives, Ilara chose a path that surprised the villagers. She remained profoundly humble and obedient. When her aunt snapped orders, Ilara followed them with a quiet yes. When her cousins mocked her tattered clothes, she offered them a gentle smile. Her heart, though bruised, refused to turn bitter. She became known in the village for her kindness, often sharing what little she had with the stray dogs or helping the elderly carry water from the well. Ilara knew that her only escape from this cycle of poverty and mistreatment was through the village schoolhouse, but her uncle refused to pay for her supplies or fees. Driven by a fierce determination, Ilara struck a deal with a local landowner. Every morning before dawn, and every evening after her chores at home were done, she worked in the farm. She pulled weeds until her fingernails bled and harvested grain until her back ached, all to earn the few coins needed for her books and tuition. Her life became a grueling marathon of labor and study. She would often read her lessons by the flickering light of the hearth while her relatives slept, her stomach growling in the dark. There were nights when the exhaustion felt heavy enough to drown her, but she whispered her parents' names to the shadows and kept turning the pages. Years passed, and Ilara's unwavering discipline began to bear fruit. Her brilliance caught the attention of a visiting scholar who helped her secure a scholarship to a prestigious university in the distant city. With nothing but a small bundle of clothes and a heart full of hope, she left the village. In the city, Ilara thrived. She studied with a hunger that surpassed her physical cravings, eventually graduating at the top of her class and entering the world of medicine and philanthropy. She became a successful doctor, respected for both her sharp intellect and her unparalleled empathy for the suffering. She moved from the shadows of the kitchen floor to the light of a world she had once only dreamed of. Years later, Ilara returned to her village, not as a beggar, but as a woman of immense grace and means. When she stood on the hill, overlooking the valley where she had once labored in the mud, she didn't feel anger toward her uncle's family. Instead, when she looked back at where she came from, the hunger, the cold, and the long, lonely nights, she always cried tears of profound gratefulness. She realized that her suffering had forged a strength in her that nothing else could have, and her hunger had taught her the true value of a full plate. Determined to ensure no other child felt the loneliness she once did, Ilara used her wealth to build a magnificent orphanage on the outskirts of the village. It was a place of warmth, filled with soft beds, plenty of nourishing food, and shelves overflowing with books. She named it The Guardian's Light and spent her days ensuring that every child who had lost their parents was treated with the dignity and love she had once been denied. Ilara's story became a legend in the valley, a reminder that kindness is a choice and that the seeds of success are often planted in the most difficult soil. She lived the rest of her days surrounded by the laughter of children, finally finding the family she thought she had lost forever. When Ilara returned to the village, the news of the doctor from the city spread like wildfire. She went first to her uncle's small, weathered cottage. Standing at the door where she had once been forced to scrub floors on an empty stomach, she saw her uncle and aunt, now grey-haired and stooped. They did not recognize the elegant woman before them until she spoke her name. The silence that followed was heavy with years of shame. Her aunt's eyes dropped to the floor, her hands trembling as she remembered the thin scraps she had once tossed to the girl. "I am not here to punish you," Ilara whispered, her voice steady. "I am here because the life I lived in this house, as hard as it was, taught me how to survive and how to love those who have nothing." She left them not with bitterness, but with a generous gift of funds to repair their home and live comfortably, a final act of the humility she had never lost. Shortly after, she opened the doors of the Guardian's Light. One afternoon, Ilara sat in the orphanage's sun-drenched dining hall. She noticed a young girl sitting alone, staring at her plate with wide, hesitant eyes, afraid to eat until she was told. Ilara walked over and knelt beside her. "In this house," Ilara said, sliding a warm bowl of soup toward the girl, "you never have to wait for permission to be full. You are safe here." As the girl took her first bite, Ilara felt a familiar sting in her eyes. Looking at the rows of children laughing and the shelves of books they could read freely, she felt a profound sense of closure. The pain of her past had finally been transformed into a sanctuary for others. On the final evening of her stay in the village, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ilara walked toward the quiet clearing where her parents were buried. For years, their graves had been marked only by 2 simple stones, but now the site was surrounded by blooming wildflowers and a sturdy iron fence she had commissioned. She knelt in the soft grass, the cool air of 2026 whispering through the trees. For a long time, she said nothing, letting the silence of the valley wash over her. Finally, she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I made it," she whispered, tracing the names carved into the stone. "I kept the kindness you taught me, even when the world was cold. I worked the fields until I could work the books, and now no child in this village will ever have to wonder if they are loved or if they will eat." As she looked back at the lights of the orphanage glowing in the distance, a beacon for those lost in the dark, she wept. They were not tears of sorrow, but of a deep, soul-shaking gratefulness. She realized that while her parents had died of sickness, their spirit had lived on through her resilience. She stood up, wiped her eyes, and looked toward the future. Ilara had turned her greatest tragedy into her greatest triumph, ensuring that her legacy wouldn't be one of loss, but one of limitless hope. With one last look at the stars, she walked back down the hill toward the laughter of the children who now called her home.